Hey, it's good to be with you and in anyone who's joining in. We have rants, right? That's
Yeah.
our start. We're ranting about some things, and I know that you sent this to me. Well, we have a few things. We have rants, which are generally focused on what is it that consulting groups offer, right? And we
Mhm.
certainly are part of that ecosystem. We offer services, but we're trying to differentiate ourselves. And I think this rant could help explore a little bit about what we think AI is good at or what it's bad at, and what the big the big groups are trying to push, which I actually think is typically it's off track, right? It's not what I would suggest for someone at any level to start their journey with this in AI. That's my take. And then secondly, as you start your journey in AI, we spoke last week and we didn't share this about the tools. And I
Mm.
am really curious about this model thing, right? Like I haven't used that word for a long time. If I was going to use this word in my world, it's sort of like a style. Like, hey, I'm going to try a different style for my website, right? You can select from a group of styles, and you can look at it
Mhm.
immediately and say, oh, this style suits me better than another. And this is a modern, more of a WordPress thing where it's a very understood structure, so therefore you can apply different styles. You can always roll your own, and we can talk about that too. So what do you think? Should we start with rants?
Definitely, because I kind of have a perspective as well, and your perspective is from the inside, right? So you worked for a consulting company in the past, right? And I didn't, right? So to me, these guys, my first contact was, way back with Arthur Anderson, and when I was in the business school, and they walked in and they looked like gods, and they were like the big company with a lot of, cloud behind them, and there was a lot of kind of celebrity power almost to what they had, right? So yeah, so it seems like they can do no wrong, from a from
Oh,
perspective
how are you wrong?
from perspective, of me, where kind of as a student I was looking up for them, and then I always thought, hey, maybe it would be cool to be kind of part of those teams, and then even if I wanted to get in, I probably couldn't. So yeah, so I have a perspective on the organizational kind of aspects of their business, right? But then we also have perspectives on the technical side. So yeah, so we can definitely have some runs.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm happy to share a little bit of where I start ranting, and then maybe you also
Mhm.
have this open, so feel free to share. But I think the visual
Mhm.
is connecting with me because of my experience with Fjord and Accenture and definitely McKinsey. Yeah, is this presentation style to me is very. I think it's what's seductive, right? Like the storytelling. And
Mhm.
and really I did read somewhere, and I don't know, someone clever said this, is that the only thing we actually understand in life is stories.
Mhm.
This is it. Like everything is a story. If it's not a story, it really just can't impact us at all. And we make up stories all the time, right? We invent all sorts of causality. So, I don't want to get too deep into psychology here, but the storytelling here is this. So let me share my window with you. It's Deloitte. Let's pick on Deloitte, right? Because they're fairly inoffensive, I guess, as companies go, at least that I worked with. Let's call them middle of the road. I don't know if that they have any particular magic or brand, but what I certainly recognize are these sort of diagrams since I've made a million of them, which is some sort of like process flow diagram. And what I don't think is going to come across in this video very easily for those watching it. But I'm just going to say, like, here's this weird idea of a role. There's a stakeholder role, there's a designer role, there's some weird risk and compliance role. And this to me is just to kind of typical idea of, hey, we're going to do work, and at some point, either management, such as myself, or when I was in the whatever capability I was in, right? That there's a lot of reviewing and polishing of any sort of research project, right? So this is just the output is probably going to be an opinion, right? And they're going to try to bolster that opinion, charts and graphs, et cetera. It's all going to be great, right? And the end product is you make millions. That's the story everybody wants to hear in business, right? And we're only going to charge you a small portion of those millions, which is always a
Yeah.
you want the risk you get to invent the benefit risk analysis of your proposal, right? Which is like, yeah, you go and do this, and we don't have any culpability in this unless we're asked to deliver it, which is what Accenture would always do, right? It's like we're going to come up with an idea and then we're going to deliver it. And so far, I don't know if this offended you that much. I just thought of it as it's interesting to take anything and try to fit it on a slide, which this isn't really telling the story in a very clear way, since the role here has the same icon for everyone, which is a no-no in design, right? If these are different people, make them look different. But that maybe this is my visual communication side coming out.
Yeah, I understand. And from my perspective, I always had this inferiority complex, when it comes to those big firms, because I looked at those reports and they were great reports, like you said, to your point, and looking great. But if I look at something like that, I really don't know how to use it. And then I kind of start thinking, hey, I'm probably not even good enough to read those. Because the diagram that I would make probably would be something that would look totally different. So yeah, but on the other hand, maybe that's kind of by design, because maybe anything, kind of more to the point than, let's say, something like what we are looking at would cost an average company maybe $500,000 or something like that. So I don't know what the business model is exactly, but I'm kind of really a little bit disappointed that, hey, I really don't know how to use any of that stuff.
Well, and let's say that, by the way, they are tackling our area of expertise, Jack, which is we both feel pretty confident of knowing exactly what AI is and what it's good at. And that we'll get into models in just a second, right? But we pretty much are convinced, at least I am convinced, that AI or generative AI is this brand new way to mathematically, with computers, et cetera, to deal with non-structured data and qualitative data, right? So normally qualitative and non-structured data is personal as heck. This is non-structured personal data that we're looking at, right? This is some deck that you have to look at it, you have to interpret it, you got to come to a conclusion, like you just said. And a 100% true, most people would be like, I don't get it. Now, depending on your pay grade, you could complain, but most people executing things don't get to complain, right? They're given the report and asked to execute it, which has happened to me many times. Thank you, McKinsey, for coming up with these goofball ideas, right? But again, they got paid. But what I don't like is this, right? So here's this sort of value proposition, right? That having an analyst talk to themselves, again, not a great graphic, but is time consuming, inefficient, difficult to scale, which is basically, to me, complaining about humans. Yeah, humans, they're a pain in the ass. We could start there, right? Like, try to avoid humans at all cost should be the title here, which is kind of weirdly a little bit playing in the strength of these consultants, right? Because they don't work in your business. They're supposedly these hired guns that are smarter and et cetera. And many of them are, by the way. I've worked with a few that actually are smarter, right? But, they get to be managing directors. They never, they pitch big companies. So I'm rambling a little bit, but you get what I mean is that you've got this kind of, do you need to solve this problem? Is this really a problem? I'll pause. It is work not effective and repeatable. And I'm like, yeah, it's never been effective and repeatable, right? That's why it's called analysts. It's creative.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be, in a sense, like this stupid diagram, right? Like no one told AI to make this diagram because it would truly fuck up this story, right? Because it doesn't, it can't tell a story like this. Well, you're going to contradict me, but you know what I mean is like it can't be persuasive yet. It can probably be neutral and helpful, right? Like it can be good depending on, we'll get to the models in a second, or it could be, it'll be some flavor of non-human is what I'm getting at. Whereas this analyst, they have to defend themselves against this stakeholder. I spent most of my time here, like
Mm.
them not liking my ideas and then me keep messing with them. Or if you work in an agency, right, you're always going to be pitching like three things: the thing you think is good, the stupid thing you think at least won't get you thrown out of the room, and then maybe something like midway in between. That's because humans basically want to combine all three, which is
Mm.
maddening, right? Rather than do the best one is always the best idea. I'll stop. A little rambling there. Do you feel if
Yeah,
I
yes. So for me, it was always, as an outsider, it was always too difficult to assess. So what would be the next diagram that I would show to the client, where I kind of start presenting solutions, and how far, let's say, this initial analysis of some sort of a process is, from a solution that would be proposed by a consultant, right? So I know that this report kind of goes into kind of AI and other
well,
things.
I was going to say here's their
Yeah.
here's their
Yeah,
here's their
and the
pitch.
subsequent slides are not even closer to the actual system being kind of proposed, because this slide is also extremely general. It's just the previous one was general in the business sense. This one is beginning to be very general in the technical sense. So again, how many steps or stages or payment cycles perhaps exist within a big consulting company to kind of get something like that to fruition? And that was always for me a conundrum. And yeah, and then yeah, I'm sure you know better that the answers to that question.
Well, it certainly comes down to if you were in charge, like Accenture was, we had to build it, right? So then you've got real problems. You know what I mean? The diagrams
Mm.
don't help you at a certain point. What I found troublesome is that the vision is often lost, right? Because these things are so difficult to interpret. I skip them.
Mm.
When I'm in, like, I just skip to prototypes, right? Like, if you're going to do this, show it to me, right? Show me what this looks like. Show me how this actually works. Demonstrate it to me. Because if you're say, I've developed a multi-agent AI system, I'd call bullshit, right? You haven't developed shit. You figured out how to use these models, which, by the way, we'll get into in a second, right? Oh, and sorry, I don't need to keep sharing. Do I need to keep sharing this? Because here's the idea: is that it's a fairly unintuitive. It's like, hey, instead of this 8-step non-existent system, which is not the way things work, oh, here's a 1, 2, 4, 3, 4-step system, and you guess what this is going to give you? All the opposite things that humans do, right? So in this in this weird way, it's like, okay, we don't have to rely on as much work.
Mm.
And I find that actually counterintuitive because usually the work part is all the gaps in between. You see what I mean? It's like we just don't
Mm.
have the talent, or what we thought was going to work doesn't work is usually the big thing. I just, not to illustrate this point, but it's kind of interesting to me. In the downtown or city of Chicago, downtown, there's a fairly large plot of land. It's right on the lake. And apparently someone bought it, right? And they're like, we're going to build this massive, massive tower, like the in between size, like massive between uh, Sears Tower and Hancock, right? So huge tower right on the lake. And they get Calatrava, your favorite, to design it.
Oh, yeah, the spire. Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So you've heard of this
Mm.
fire thing. So anyway,
Mhm.
they go
Mhm.
in and they start building, and they dig and do whatever the hard part is, right? And they build a a foundation for it, and they run out of money, and the whole thing gets scrapped, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so here you go, reality, right? So none of this work really, until you get to that point of like opening the doors, because now they actually had to take they're building something else there, and they had to take that massively expensive footprint, that foundation, and sort of like try to fix it to work with this new design. And I thought, like, now that's what you pay consultant groups to do. Like, how much do we have to pay extra? How much can we keep? And I'd say, Jack, for us, we're like, don't scrap everything, right? Your investment needs to be strategic in a good way, but you have to reuse what you already have. Does that make sense in your experience, right? You don't scrap everything.
Yeah. And yes. So let's say if you scroll a little bit down to the next page, yeah. So talking about scrapping, like for example, those
Oh,
blue
here we
heads,
go.
those blue heads, right?
Sure.
So for example, the head with data sourcing, right? Like that would be a huge project in itself. And then again, maybe I am a little bit unfairly accusing them of kind of maybe creating like too high level of overview of what they are trying to do, but just the data sourcing project can be in itself, like a transitionary or revolutionary project for any organization, independently from all the other things that they are putting here. So
Yeah.
okay. So for example, data sourcing, right? So what do we do? Do we replace the existing database systems with generative systems? That seems to be a huge diagram in itself, right? Or do we kind of
Yeah.
integrate, a data lake with something else and kind of create like a new vectorized representation of everything that the organization have, and propose a RAG architecture, right? So the sourcing and all the other heads, kind of are worth of maybe at least a PhD dissertation, no less.
Well, and especially, I mean, I can say from absolute personal experience with a huge, huge multinational company is doing interviews for people. This idea of prompts is no joke. Like, I don't think you have any idea in any company what people actually need. You know what I
Mm.
mean? You have some vague intranet, or you've got resources, you get a manual or something like that, right? Like, these are the typical ways people solve certain problems. And in this particular company, I know the complaints were always about using these systems. Like, I need to do X. I know how to do X, right? I know how to do my job. And these are mainly scientists, right? I know how to do my job, but I don't know how to use your stupid software. And the other company I work for, software was much better, right? Like, how many
Mm.
times have you heard this? So, even this idea of what do people want oftentimes goes wrong because they think they want something that tells them how to do their job. See that what I mean? If we go back here, this is like, you don't have to do your job anymore. This does your job, right? And that
Mm.
is not that's not what people need help with, right? They don't need
Mm.
help with coming up with weird crap. That's what we do for a living. I love that. That's why I'm here, right? It's probably like you just said is, hey, can I get help understanding why our data sources are so poor and why they're so unreliable and why they aren't already part of helping people do their job, right? Or what's their limitation right now? How are they hindering us?
Yeah. And if you could scroll to page 6 of this report, there's something that really is also huge. Like here at like if we look at any of those rows, but maybe the most screaming example of something that is really hard to do is the statement that, okay, so on the typical language models rely on static knowledge with fixed training cutoff dates, and then the agency is talking about dynamically adjusting real-time knowledge sources. And again, oh my God, this is such a huge deal. I mean, if they were able to pull it off, then they probably, they would have another multi-billion-dollar business, in my opinion, to kind of like really truly kind of get that, dynamic knowledge source kind of to work. So yeah, so I think that those are, I mean, those are exciting topics. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm kind of trying to work on those areas as well. But I guess my point here is that maybe they kind of are here not, that they are delivered in a way that is a little bit idealistic, I would say.
Well, absolutely. And also, I'm just going to also, well, not, I'm going to complain because I think in our last meeting and maybe in the last post we did about this is I'm talking about education, right? And education
Mm,
being both iterative and playful, right? Like that's what work is or should be, right? Like it should be iterative, playful, plenty of feedback loops, and also I would say experimental,
mm,
because if you've ever tried to make money in the market, the way to make money in the market is to bet a lot of things, right? Like you're never
mm,
going to bet on the right thing. And this is true in business as well, right? Now, can AI help people iterate quickly through ideas? Well, yeah, just basically off the shelf stuff is really good at that, right? Like you can probably get through at least five or seven, you can get a dozen concepts, get through iteratively and get to that prototype stage a lot quicker than you could before. And that means to me, that's what I would counsel rather than this. I think this is this weird. I mean, we talked about the replacement thing. I mean, or have we? I don't know if we published our work on on replacing people. I would say, replacing people with who do very arcane jobs that are that are antiquated, right? They're keeping the lights on jobs. We talked about that maybe. But like I said, this is not that. Analysts are not those people, right? They're there trying to uncover value for a customer, right? Like what can you
mm.
do to bring more value and achieve what is it scalability or whatever, right? You can be fast, efficient, and scalable. And it's what is the joke? Pick two.
Mm.
And most businesses won't be able to make a decision, right? Because that's why the prototyping is important. Anyway, but then you have a lot of non-AI generated uh, what is the this is called why am I blanking on this? Stock. You have non-AI
Mm,
generated stock because they can afford it.
mm,
But they do, they pick their best and brightest right out of school to pose in front of computers and say, look, anyway, I'm talking advertising, not substance here. So, well, anyway, we can go on about this. I wonder if I can rely on your expertise because there's a new wrinkle and it might come in handy. Shall we switch to just a
yeah,
new topic real quick?
yeah, totally.
Okay, so I've never. We started at least with my analogy of a style and a model. What do you think? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, so I think that. So recently I've heard something interesting that might be kind of like maybe be a kind of another perspective on the modeling and the styles, right? So why do we need AI or generative AI, right? So somebody said, and I've read it in an article somewhere, maybe on LinkedIn, that we need all those advanced systems so that they can do the dishes for us or sweep the floors, and so that we will have time to do poetry or make paintings and stuff like that, right? Not the other way around, right? So we don't want the AI to write poetry for us or make paintings, so that we have the only thing that we can do that is left is doing the dishes and sweeping the floor, right? So that is kind of the thing that kind of resonated with me a little bit. Like, hey, we are kind of building already AI systems that are kind of like really high up there, right? They can definitely make paintings. They can definitely write poetry or music, and we have a bot, or AI system that can emulate Mozart or Johann Sebastian Bach and all those
Yeah.
classics, and their music is going to be indistinguishable, right? Because they can capture the patterns. But when it comes to doing like a plumbing job or washing dishes, or in manufacturing, something that's called bin picking, still it's very hard to do. It's very difficult to make system work in an unstructured world that is mundane, right? Right. So making a painting is a kind of unstructured world, but it's kind of high flying, right? So that's kind of bad. Picking up an appropriate screw from a bucket so that it fits, the widget that you are building. That is a very hard thing to do for the AI, and maybe it shouldn't be, right? So yeah. So that kind of goes to your point, about models and style, right? Maybe if I understand correctly, your analogy.
Well, and I love that because I think for sure we need to address this. It's been the biggest topic of the book. Is the first thing that you think of when you think of AI being able to accomplish these sort of more knowledge-oriented tasks, which happened in the very beginning, right? That it could answer a question, or it could sort of replace Google for the sort of fact retrieval thing, right? Like it could seemingly easily without actually being trained in a topic, come up with the right answer for a topic, which is maybe beyond what we can discuss today, but certainly notable, right? Like shocking. And it brought up a few questions in my mind, which is the word work, the word job, and I think that you added a third, which I like too, is the word labor. There are many words, and I'm just going to count those three because I don't know that we know which one of them we are doing at any particular. Oh, and play. I mean, I like to throw play in there too, right? Because you play music, right? You don't work music. And maybe this is just semantics, but I still think there's something to that, right? You play at poetry and you play at art making. I hope that's my, at least I think of it as being playful. I play at and at analysis. You see what I mean? I play at design or building, multimodal. I want it to be play because it's iterative. It never has a completely perfect endpoint. It's just something that keeps, you try to build architectures so that you can play more. So Legos are a great example to me of what I think is why I like computers, right? And I do have a drawer filled with screws because I also have to build things in the real world. And like you just said, not having the thing that you need is probably the case for 99% of the people, right? Like you can't plumb. I happen to have been a plumber once, so I have all the plumbing stuff, right? Like you need this particular wrench, you need this. It's just not an AI thing, if you see what I mean. Like it's not something. I don't think it's connection to the real world. Well, as I said, good topic for next time. But I love those concepts.
Yeah,
And
and then maybe what kind of maybe another thing maybe that we can discuss next time is since this music playing concept is kind of conducive to a lot of discussions here. So for example, right? I mean, we kind of agree that playing an instrument might be something that is relaxing, fun, really kind of like a higher order or higher level of creative activities, right? Like playing a piano concerto or some violin stuff, right? So that's kind of like one level where maybe artificial intelligence can kind of play a role a little bit. Maybe can help us learn, right? An instrument faster, something like that. But then when it comes to, let's say we are talking music and playing and creating a product. So let's say a recording session, right? I mean, I know musicians like Steve Vai, for example. He is like wonderful guitarist, right? Or
yeah,
Mike Oldfield, tubular bells. Everybody probably knows that record, right?
mhm.
They talk openly about the traumatic experiences of recording the albums right? And they are great artists, but they are talking about, fingers bleeding from repeating the phrases, on the guitar all the time, and really kind of so many times that, the guitarist, is kind of bleeding from his fingers, or having a nervous breakdown because of the repetitions and polishing certain aspects of the music, like my Goldfield's recording of Tubular Bells. Right, so traumatic experiences, right? So,
or Wendy
so
Carlos, the Moog went out of tune all the time, right? So
yeah,
it's this
exactly.
thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you have playing, right, a music, and then, but if you want to make a product, right, that is musical, or some artistic aspects to it, then it's really not easy to do, right? So maybe AI can play a role over there, and this can be translated to business as well, right? We can exchange emails, right? We can design, a solution to something, if within an organization, but then there's also situations where the rubber meets the road, and we are on a tight deadline, and we really have to crank out because there is a lot of money on the line to finish a project. And then, you look at those diagrams from those big consulting companies with all this AI beautifully laid out, and I don't know if this is actually going to work, right? Because, I want.
100%. And I do want to just put a quick pin in that, because that is, to me, this role, right? The human computer role,
Mhm.
which has been my career, it is 1,000,000%. It's absolutely fascinating. But where I think you can help me, and maybe help anyone who's with us, is this model. And let me see if I got it wrong, because I think I may have. So here I am in my first foray of doing my local instance of a model, right? And I'm
Mhm.
using this is what is the LM Studio, right? So I
Mhm.
think I mentioned this before, and you use something I think similar. And what LM Studio offers you is the ability to do a RAG, which is to take a bunch of content, and then I think, use that as sort of a basis for some sort of a query, right? Like you can just
Mhm.
say, hey, find me this, or I think that's RAG, right? That seems right.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
in this case, I didn't know how something worked, so I just asked it. And apparently, the magic of these models, because they're pretty big. I mean, they're like 3 GB of whatever,
Mhm.
which I assume is 1,000,000 strings. And I have no idea actually what it actually looks like, in there, but I don't think it's readable, right? There is no textbook
Yeah.
about,
Nobody does, right? I mean,
yeah,
you can understand the architecture, but the actual distribution of weights within the neural
right.
network, it's a black box, right? So you don't know that.
So almost like in a sense, like reading a JPEG from the file itself, right, would be not only
Yeah,
tedious, but it
yeah,
really wouldn't make much sense,
yeah,
right?
yes, yeah.
Even though I guess it is interpretable, right? But that's how the computer sees it, and this is a big thing I teach in class, right? Is the computer only sees structures, right? It does not
Mhm.
under, it doesn't really understand anything or care. But here's this new thing called finding models, right? So this is where I thought maybe you could just give me a little bit of your idea. Like I did, I downloaded a model, and I downloaded a couple models, and I kind of asked the same question of two different models, and they're very different. And I would say
Yeah.
one thing that's true is just speed, which is on my computer, one was fast and one was slow. So I love fast and hate
Mhm.
slow. But I wouldn't even know how to start with these, right? Like you could just go in, I guess, all day long and be, um, well, or are these trained toward particular kinds of problems? I don't even know what to make of this. Can you
Exactly
help me?
right. Exactly right. So there is a number of like in your example here, there is a great number of open source models out there, big,
Mhm.
small. There's a great number of models that are not that are proprietary that you have to pay for in terms of the token counts and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we really don't know what kind of data set is used to train those models, right? So
Hmm.
chances are that they overlap quite a bit because maybe they are all relying on Wikipedia, for example, or whatever stuff they were able to grab from the networks, right? So that's one thing. Now, another thing is that they all will have a little bit different internal architectures. So those models are not just like a uniform neural network. There's modules in there. There is kind of certain groupings of those connections that are kind of maybe meant to amplify certain capability and maybe remove some other capabilities, right? There is going to be models that will have some capabilities to understand vision, right? So a subset of the
Oh, okay.
neurons is going to have some understanding of the image analytics. So at the end of the day, this is kind of all very experimental.
Mm.
How do you apply? So you probably want to pick, perhaps something that is going to be, hardware dependent, right? So if you have a lot of hardware, you can pick a big model. Then maybe the criterion would be, how quickly the answer comes back, right? Smaller models tend to be a little bit faster. Now, if you have something that is really a simple problem to deal with, maybe you can go with like a 9B or 7B or 3B, which is on the small side.
Oh, I see.
If you,
Okay.
yeah, if you have a very big model, then maybe it's going to be something that you need to have maybe 70B or 400B is probably the biggest model, open source model that is out there, Llama 400B. So then if you know that your problem is heterogeneous, then there is certain models like, for example, Mixtral models that are combining multiple smaller models and they are all trained for a specific task, like maybe doing some mathematics, right? Maybe doing some planning, maybe doing something else, right? Like this one, for example, this 8 times something, it means that there is like 8 models that are all specializing in a smaller chunk of a task.
Mm.
So at the end of the day, it's very experimental, but the direction where this is going is that those models that you see here on your list, they're gonna be more and more powerful. So perhaps a year ago, this Mixtral 8 times 7B, was a 70 billion model, but now it's a 7B level model. So so we are going in an optimization direction where those models, even though smaller, they have as much capability as maybe GPT 3.0 had about a year ago or 2 years ago. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my way of looking at this. Experimentation is really the key here.
But that does open up some new wrinkles, right? Because then you could almost say, like, back to our, here's these magic things you can plug in to solve these problems, so your analyst, you can fire them, right? But each of those needs someone to understand, like, its inputs and outputs. And forgive me, I might have an analogy and you can tell me I'm wrong because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think this is correct. But I don't know that much about processor architecture. But what I do know lately from watching videos and stuff is that stuff comes in, and then there are different parts of this uh, chip architecture that handle different kinds of things, and then you sort of mix them together and you try to get them out the other side, right? So, are you saying that even these models are, in a sense, they're like CPUs, right? They take in things and they put them into different places and then come out with something, or is my analogy terrible?
Yeah, exactly right. I would maybe kind of get even more basic with the analogy, and yours is correct. But at the end of the day, what happens within the model is basically matrix multiplication. You have some content that comes in and gets pushed by matrix multiplication with various weights attached to them and various connections and various kind of ways
Mm.
to kind of like combine pieces of it. So this is based on the ability of the hardware to be able to quickly multiply very large matrices. So your analogy is exactly right. But at the end of the day, what you put into the neural network is a vector. What you get out of it is a vector. That vector could be an image.
Yes,
That vector could be a sentence,
sure.
but it is vectors. And so what you do internally with it, it's a wide open book, right? You can do a number of things, and uh, starting maybe if you are teaching your students and you are probably starting your discussion maybe with a perceptron where there is only one neuron, that has some inputs, and those inputs get combined, and there is like a dendrite or another connection to something, and there is an output, right?
Hmm.
So now if you have 100 of those, you can already do some document classification. But if you have billions of those, right, then you can start kind of writing Shakespearean novels, right? You can write music, right? And nobody knows exactly how to create like the best optimization for a problem. So what all these different companies come up with is different ways to kind of combine those matrices and multiply them together, so that the answer comes out maybe faster, right? Maybe the memory footprint is going to be smaller. And then, how do we actually can push on those neural networks information so that, it kind of gets mashed together in during the training phase, so that the output kind of makes sense, but also doesn't produce offensive, language, right? It's not going to allow you to kind of do certain kind of like nefarious things, right? So there is also a lot of work in the AI safety that is kind of under the hood in those models.
Well, we're gonna have to end here because I think you also brought up the now I got a new analogy, which is going back to the recording studio, right? If you have a
Mhm.
synthesizer, by the way, it's a square wave or a sine wave, and then you have a million knobs, which you're just starting to
Mm.
make these parameters. And like you said, sometimes it comes out squonky, which I just heard this weekend. Somebody really was into squonk, like,
Yeah,
and, I kept thinking, turn those knobs. And I think that's what you're saying, analogous to this, right? Is that, there's a lot of knobs to be turned, and you do still have to have this idea. And we'll give them some credit for saying humans need to keep their eyes on this stuff. So I guess we'll
yeah,
have to be like keeping our eyes on how AI is working. But we'll keep
yeah.
going till next week, Jack. Always, thank you for educating me. Appreciate it.
Yes, yeah, yeah. My pleasure. Thank you, Mike.